House number 13. The Mystery in the Dark Forest. House number 13. The Mystery in the Dark Forest is a chilling and suspenseful story about 5 children who embark on a seemingly innocent game of hide-and-seek in a forest. What starts as a fun adventure quickly turns into a terrifying and life-changing ordeal. The story begins on a sunny weekend, when 5 families decide to go on a picnic near a remote forest, far from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The parents, excited to relax, prepare food while the children, full of energy, entertain themselves by playing a game of hide-and-seek. However, as they run through the dense forest, they become disoriented and wander deeper into the woods, unknowingly straying far from the picnic spot. As the sky darkens and the atmosphere shifts, the children realize they are lost. The once inviting forest now seems ominous and unfamiliar, and fear begins to settle in. The children, hungry and frightened, try to retrace their steps but only find themselves walking in circles. With the cold night closing in, they stumble upon an eerie, decaying house, standing alone in the heart of the woods. It is house number 13, and despite its creepy appearance, the children, exhausted and desperate, decide to take refuge there. But once inside, strange and unsettling events begin to unfold. The house seems to have a life of its own. Doors open and close on their own, strange sounds echo through the halls, and there is an overwhelming sense of being watched. As they explore, they discover old photographs of families who had lived in the house before, their faces eerily blank, as though they were hiding a dark secret. The children soon realize they are not alone. The house is haunted, and the spirits of the people who once lived there now roam the rooms, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. The tension heightens when the children encounter a ghostly figure, a woman in a white dress, with hollow eyes that seem to follow them. As the night progresses, the children are drawn deeper into the house's sinister mystery, with each passing moment filled with terror. With no way to escape and no one to help, they must confront their fears and the malevolent force within the house. Meanwhile, their families and the police are searching frantically, unaware of the horrors their children are facing. The night stretches on, and with each minute that passes, the children's hope dwindles. Just when all seems lost, they hear a voice from the outside. The search party has arrived, and after a harrowing night of terror, the children are found and brought back to safety. However, the nightmare doesn't end there. The house remains, a silent and ominous presence in the forest, and the memories of the children's terrifying ordeal will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The truth behind the house, its history, and the spirits trapped within its walls remain a mystery, but one thing is certain: some secrets are better left undisturbed. Into the unknown. It was a bright Saturday morning when the families gathered together, excited for a weekend getaway in the serene countryside. The fresh air and chirping birds promised a peaceful escape from their usual hectic lives. 5 families, with children ranging from ages 7 to 12, packed their bags and set off to spend the day near a vast, remote forest on the outskirts of town. The forest, known for its beauty and mystery, had always fascinated them, but no one ever ventured too deep. Today they would change that. The families arrived at a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering trees and the calming sounds of nature. The parents, eager to relax and enjoy the warmth of the sun, started setting up a picnic. The children, brimming with excitement, immediately began to explore the area, their laughter echoing through the forest as they played games. As the hours passed, the game of hide-and-seek began. It was the children's favorite, and they would often play for hours without getting bored. This time, however, their playful activity would lead them into something far darker than they could ever have imagined. "Ready or not, here I come," shouted Lucas, the eldest of the group, his voice breaking the quiet stillness of the forest. The others scattered in all directions, hiding among the trees, behind rocks, and under the bushes. But as Lucas began to search, something strange began to happen. The deeper he ventured into the woods, the more lost he felt. The towering trees seemed to stretch higher and closer together, as if they were closing in on him. The forest, once so inviting, now seemed almost menacing, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Soon, the rest of the group realized they had wandered farther than they intended. As they searched for their hiding friends, they noticed that the trees were becoming denser, the paths less familiar. The sun, once high in the sky, was now beginning to dip behind the horizon. The children tried to retrace their steps, but every path seemed to lead them deeper into the woods. The cheerful voices they had shared earlier now grew quiet, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. "We should head back now," said Mia, her voice trembling. It's getting late. The others nodded in agreement, but it was already too late. The once familiar forest now felt like a labyrinth. With each step, the children found themselves only more lost, and the shadows lengthened around them, turning the forest from a friendly playground into a dark and foreboding place. "Where are we?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with panic. He had always been the leader of the group, but now, even he seemed uncertain. "This wasn't the way we came." They looked around, but every tree seemed to look the same, every path indistinguishable from the last. The forest was vast, and the more they walked, the more they realized just how deep they had ventured into its heart. There was no sign of the clearing where their parents were waiting. Their game of hide-and-seek had turned into a nightmare. As night began to fall, the chill in the air grew stronger, and the children's stomachs started to growl with hunger. The faint light of the setting sun barely filtered through the thick canopy above, and the forest became even darker, shadows shifting in the corners of their vision. The trees seemed to press in on them from all sides, and every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made them jump in fear. "We need to find a way out," said Ethan, his voice now barely a whisper. His small frame shook, not just from the cold, but from the creeping terror that had begun to seep into their bones. For hours they walked, their steps growing more sluggish and uncertain. Every turn seemed to lead to more confusion, and their fear began to mount. Mia, normally the bravest of the group, was visibly shaken. She gripped the hands of her younger sister, Emily, who was crying softly, her small sobs echoing in the still night. "Maybe if we keep walking, we'll find the way back," suggested Lucas, though his words sounded more like a desperate plea than a plan. But deep down, they all knew that something wasn't right. The forest wasn't just large, it felt endless. Just as they were beginning to lose hope, they saw something ahead. A faint glimmer of light flickered through the trees, like a beacon calling to them. With renewed energy, they moved toward it, hoping it was a way out or perhaps someone else who could help them. As they got closer, the light grew brighter, and soon, they found themselves standing in front of an old, decrepit house that appeared out of nowhere. It was as though the house had been waiting for them, hidden in the dense trees. The house looked abandoned, its paint peeling and windows cracked. Its dark, looming silhouette seemed to mock their helplessness. There was something eerie about it, something that made their hearts race with both fear and curiosity. But in their tired, frightened state, it was the only thing that promised shelter from the night. Without thinking, they approached the house. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the scent of old wood. The children hesitated at the threshold, unsure if they should enter, but the sounds of the forest outside, whispers in the wind, distant creaks, made the decision for them. They stepped inside, desperate for refuge. Inside the house, everything was still. Too still. The floorboards groaned under their feet as they cautiously moved deeper into the house. Strange noises echoed from the walls, like footsteps following them from behind. It felt as if the house itself was alive, watching them. "What is this place?" Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Lucas replied, his face pale. "But it doesn't feel right." They didn't realize it yet, but they had entered the house that no one was supposed to find. The house with a dark past, the house that should have been left alone. And now, as the door slammed shut behind them, the children were trapped in the very place they were meant to avoid. Little did they know, the nightmare was only just beginning. The haunting night. The moment the door slammed shut behind them, an overwhelming chill swept through the house, sinking deep into their bones. A haunting silence settled over the room, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel like a struggle. The children stood frozen in place, their hearts pounding wildly in their chests, too terrified to move. The house seemed to hold its breath, watching them, waiting for the next step. What was that?" Emily whimpered, clutching her sister's hand tightly. Her voice trembled with fear, and her wide, tear-filled eyes darted around the dimly lit room. "It's so dark here. I don't like it." Lucas, ever the protector, took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His voice was shaky, but he forced himself to speak. "It's just the wind, okay? This house is old. It's probably just creaking." But even as he said the words, he could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on him. The air felt thick, heavy with something that didn't belong. Something wrong. They moved cautiously through the house, their footsteps muffled by the thick layers of dust covering the floor. The children had no choice but to explore, desperate for some sort of clue. Anything that would explain where they were and how they could get out. The walls were lined with faded portraits of strangers, their eyes unnervingly real, as if they were watching them. The air was stale, like the house had been abandoned for decades, yet there was an inexplicable sense that it hadn't been empty for long. With each step, they ventured further into the house, passing through rooms that felt like time had stopped. Cobwebs hung from the corners of the ceiling, and old furniture sat untouched, covered in sheets. But it wasn't just the house's desolation that made them uneasy. It was the sense that they weren't alone. Suddenly, a low, guttural groan echoed from the floor above. The sound was so deep, so visceral, that it seemed to come from the very walls themselves. The children froze, their blood running cold. They could feel it, a presence. Something was up there with them. "Did you hear that?" Mia whispered, her voice tight with fear. "What was that noise?" "I don't know," Lucas muttered, his eyes scanning the dark hallway that stretched before them. The groan had stopped, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted, turning thick with tension. It felt like they were being drawn into something they couldn't escape. And then they heard it, a soft, deliberate whisper barely audible at first. It seemed to come from the floor above them, a voice calling their names. "Lucas! Mia! Emily!" The children's blood ran cold. It was unmistakable. That was no wind, no trick of the house. That voice, it knew their names. "Who's there?" Lucas called out, his voice trembling as he tried to summon some semblance of courage. His mind raced, but no answers came. He tried to convince himself it was just an illusion, but deep down he knew it wasn't. Without warning, the house seemed to shift, as if it were alive, breathing. The floor beneath them groaned, and the walls seemed to close in. A sudden gust of wind blew through the open windows, rattling the shutters and casting eerie shadows against the walls. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, now blending with the sounds of footsteps. The children's panic skyrocketed. "We need to get out of here," Mia cried, her voice high with terror. "Now!" But as they turned to run, the door they had entered slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. The children screamed in horror, pounding on the door with their fists, but it wouldn't budge. The house had claimed them. They were prisoners, and they could feel it, feel the house breathing, pulsating, as if it were hungry for something. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew more insistent, more menacing. The walls seemed to echo with a sinister laugh that sent chills down their spines. The children looked at each other, wide-eyed and terrified, realizing they weren't just lost in an abandoned house. This was no ordinary place. This was a house that fed on fear. "Please help us," Emily cried out, her voice breaking. But no one answered. The house was alive with its own twisted rhythm, its own dark pulse. It was watching them, listening to their every move. And as the minutes dragged on, the whispers turned into screams. Screams of agony, of torment, of souls long lost to the house's clutches. Desperation set in. Lucas led the others down a narrow hallway, where the walls seemed to close in with each step they took. Their breathing was ragged, their bodies shaking. Mia's face was pale, her eyes wild with panic. Emily, barely able to stand from the fear and exhaustion, clung to her sister. They found a staircase at the end of the hall, leading up into a pitch-black void. A faint light flickered from above, casting shadows that danced across the walls. It was the only possible escape, but the thought of going up into that darkness made their skin crawl. "What if we don't make it out of here?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "We have to," Lucas said, trying to sound confident, but even he wasn't sure anymore. "We'll stick together, no matter what." But as they ascended the stairs, the whispers became louder, more frantic. The air grew heavier, suffocating them with each step. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, closing in on them like the jaws of a beast. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house, followed by a scream, an agonizing, blood-curdling scream that pierced the night. The children froze in terror. The scream was so loud, so full of pain, it sent a shockwave through their bodies. "What was that?" Mia gasped, her heart hammering in her chest. She tried to pull away from the stairs, but Lucas held her back. "It's coming from above," Lucas said, his voice barely a whisper. "We have to go. Now!" They ran up the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air grew colder, the walls more oppressive. The house was closing in, and they could feel it. The house wanted them. At the top of the stairs, they found a door slightly ajar, with a dim light spilling from the crack. They pushed it open, and what they saw on the other side would haunt them forever. Inside was an old, dusty room filled with antique furniture. But in the center of the room, there was a large, dusty mirror. And reflected in the mirror was something no one should ever see. A figure, standing just behind them, watching their every move. The figure was dark, its face obscured, but its presence was unmistakable. It was waiting. And as the children turned to face the mirror, the figure stepped forward, its hand reaching out for them. A scream echoed through the house, louder than any before. And then, everything went black. The dark revelation. The moment the room plunged into darkness, it felt as if the air itself had been sucked out of their lungs. The faint flicker of light from the mirror seemed to vanish, leaving them in a suffocating void. Every nerve in their bodies screamed for them to run, but they were frozen, paralyzed by fear. Lucas reached out, his hand trembling, searching for the others. His fingers brushed against Mia's arm, then Emily's small, cold hand. "Where's the light?" Mia gasped, her voice thin, barely audible in the thick silence that had enveloped them. Her eyes frantically darted around, trying to make sense of the room that now felt like a tomb. Suddenly, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed from behind them. The children's blood turned to ice, their hearts pounding in their chests. There was something moving in the dark. Something, or someone. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just behind them. Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking, barely above a breath. "I hear it," Lucas said, his voice barely audible. He swallowed hard, his mind racing for answers, but there were none. Before they could react, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, causing the door to slam shut with an eerie, hollow thud. The darkness grew even heavier, pressing against them like an unseen weight. The children jumped at the sound, but they couldn't move. The room seemed to have swallowed them whole. Then a low, guttural growl filled the air, reverberating through their bodies like a warning. The sound was coming from the corner of the room. They dared not look, but the curiosity gnawed at them, pulling their heads toward the source of the noise. They could barely make out the figure that loomed in the darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that twisted and contorted in unnatural angles. Its face was obscured by a cloak of shadow, but its eyes, oh, those eyes, glowed faintly red like embers. The children could feel its gaze on them, piercing through the darkness, watching, waiting. Mia's breath hitched, her pulse racing as panic surged through her body. What is that?" she managed to stammer, her voice cracking with terror. "I don't know," Lucas whispered, his voice strained, barely able to hold it together. "But we need to get out of here." They turned to flee, but the room seemed to stretch, the walls closing in on them like the jaws of a trap. The door, the only possible escape, was now completely shut, sealed, as if the house itself was keeping them there. Desperation surged in their veins. The children pounded against the door, screaming for help, but the sound of their cries was swallowed by the house's ominous silence. Suddenly, the figure in the corner moved, shifting like liquid shadow. It seemed to glide across the room, its limbs twisting unnaturally as it came closer. The children backed away, stumbling over their own feet, their bodies shaking in fear. "Please don't," Emily whispered, her voice breaking as she fell to the ground, unable to move any longer. The terror had stripped her of the strength to run. The figure stopped right in front of them, towering over them, its red eyes glowing brighter now. Its presence was suffocating, like a dark cloud pressing in from all sides. The children could feel their hearts race, the sound deafening in their ears. And then a voice, low, cold, and dripping with malice, slithered through the air. "You shouldn't have come here." The words echoed through the room like a curse. It was impossible to tell where the voice was coming from. Was it from the figure itself? Or had it been the house speaking to them? Before they could respond, the air around them began to vibrate, as if something enormous was stirring beneath the floorboards. The walls groaned, a deep, resonant hum filling the room. Something was waking up. Something ancient. Something evil. The children tried to run again, but the ground beneath them began to shift. The floorboards creaked and groaned, as if the house itself was shifting to trap them. Lucas grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her toward the back of the room, but they couldn't escape the feeling that they were being herded, cornered. In a frenzy, Mia spotted a narrow passageway on the far side of the room, partially hidden by a stack of old, rotting furniture. It seemed like their only chance to escape, but it was also the darkest part of the house. There was no telling what lay beyond it. "We have to go through there," Mia said, her voice trembling. "It's the only way." Lucas hesitated, but there was no choice. He nodded grimly, pulling Emily to her feet. They ran toward the passageway, the sound of the figure's footsteps closing in on them from behind. The children could feel the heat of its gaze on their backs, but they dared not look. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them, through the narrow gap in the furniture, and into the unknown. As they crawled through the passage, the walls seemed to close in tighter, making the air feel thicker, more suffocating. The faint red glow from the figure's eyes still burned through the cracks in the walls, and they could hear its steps echoing behind them. But as they emerged into the next room, the floor beneath them gave way, and they fell into a deeper darkness, tumbling through the void like falling into an abyss. The children screamed, but their cries were lost in the endless blackness that surrounded them. They had fallen into the house's deepest secret, and the worst was yet to come. The secrets beneath. As the children fell deeper into the abyss, the sound of their frantic breathing and racing hearts was drowned out by the deafening roar of the unknown. It felt as though they had fallen forever, but in reality, only moments had passed before they slammed onto a cold, hard floor, the shock of the impact rattling their bones. They lay there, gasping for breath, unable to see anything in the suffocating blackness. The air was thick with an unsettling dampness, and the smell of decay, old wood, musty stone, and something foul, seeped into their nostrils. The coldness clung to their skin like an icy grip, and the silence pressed down on them, suffocating and unnatural. Mia was the first to move, her hands trembling as she reached out to feel the ground beneath her. "Is everyone okay?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the heavy darkness. Her fingers brushed against Lucas's arm, and she grabbed it tightly. I think so," Lucas said, his voice shaky. "But we need to get out of here. This place, it's not right." They slowly helped each other to their feet, the darkness still thick and impenetrable. They stumbled forward, groping the walls for support. The cold seemed to get worse the deeper they went, and the sense of something sinister watching them grew stronger with every step they took. It felt as if the house itself was alive, pulsing with a dark energy that surrounded them like a smothering fog. And then they heard it, a sound that made their blood freeze in their veins. A low, grinding noise like something scraping against the floor. It started faint, barely noticeable, but it grew louder, closer. It was as though someone was moving through the darkness toward them. What's that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling with fear. She grabbed onto Lucas, her grip tightening with each passing second. "I don't know," Lucas replied, his heart racing. "But we need to move. Now." With urgency propelling them, the children continued down the passage, but the scraping sound was growing closer, echoing off the stone walls. The walls seemed to close in on them, narrow and claustrophobic, making each step feel like an eternity. And just when they thought they couldn't take it anymore, the scraping stopped, dead in its tracks. For a moment there was nothing but silence, an oppressive stillness that hung in the air like a thick fog. The children held their breath, waiting for the next sound. But then, out of nowhere, a loud crash echoed from behind them, and they whipped around, their hearts leaping into their throats. It was as though the walls themselves had come alive. They could see nothing, but the sound was unmistakable. The grinding of stone against stone, the creak of old timbers shifting. It was as if the entire house was shifting, adjusting, preparing for something. "Run!" Mia screamed, her voice high with panic. "We need to get out of here." The children sprinted forward, the passage ahead seeming to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning in unnatural ways. It was as if the house was alive, and the walls were conspiring against them. Every time they thought they were nearing an exit, another wall would loom in front of them, trapping them in a never-ending labyrinth. They stumbled through the winding corridors, each step feeling like they were running in circles, their desperation growing with every passing second. They could still hear that scraping noise closer now, too close. Suddenly, the passage opened into a wide, cavernous room. It was enormous, stretching far beyond what their eyes could comprehend. The walls were lined with old wooden shelves filled with books and odd trinkets, each one covered in a thick layer of dust. But that wasn't what caught their attention. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. Its surface shimmered, reflecting a faint, eerie light, but the reflection was wrong. The children couldn't put their finger on it, but something about it was off. The reflection of the room was distorted, as if reality itself was bending and warping within it. As they stepped into the room, the temperature dropped even further, and the air felt heavy with an unnatural presence. The mirror, once a reflection of the room, now seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its surface rippling like water. Mia stepped forward, her eyes drawn to it against her will. "Don't look at it," Emily cried, her voice full of fear. "It's a trap." But it was too late. Mia's eyes locked with the reflection in the mirror, and she felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was like being pulled into the glass itself, her body frozen in place, her mind clouded with a sense of dread. "Mia!" Lucas shouted, grabbing her arm and yanking her away from the mirror. But it was no use. She was in a trance, her body unresponsive, her eyes glazed over. The air in the room shifted, and the mirror began to hum, low and resonant like a distant chant. The children felt a coldness seep into their bones, and the ground beneath them trembled. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift, the walls warping in strange, terrifying ways. The light from the mirror flickered, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. And then they heard the voice again. This time, it was louder, more commanding. It echoed from the very walls themselves, a cold, hollow voice that sent chills down their spines. "You shouldn't have come here. You've awakened something ancient." The children froze in terror, the full weight of the house's curse pressing down on them. They had wandered too far, too deep into the heart of the house, and now it was clear. The house had no intention of letting them leave. The room began to darken, the shadows stretching longer, the cold deepening. Something was coming, something that had been waiting, and the children were trapped, alone, with no way out. In that moment they realized the house was alive and it was hungry. To be continued. The final struggle. The children's breaths came in ragged gasps as they scrambled to move away from the mirror. But no matter how hard they tried, the air felt thick and oppressive, as if the very room itself was resisting their every movement. Mia remained in her trance-like state, her eyes blank and unblinking, while Lucas and Emily desperately pulled her away from the mirror, each tug growing weaker against an invisible force. Suddenly, the cold intensified, and the room began to pulse with an unnatural energy. The walls seemed to close in on them, the ceiling lowering as the space around them shrank, forcing them into a tighter, more claustrophobic confinement. A guttural growl reverberated through the room, and they all froze in fear. Out of the corner of their eyes, they saw it, the figure of something tall, shadowy, and indistinct. Its presence felt more than seen. It was as if the very darkness had taken shape, and it was approaching them. Its slow, deliberate footsteps sent shivers down their spines, as they could feel the ground beneath them tremble with each step it took. "Run! We need to go now!" Emily screamed, her voice filled with pure panic. She could feel the grip of the unknown presence, and it was unbearable. But Mia, still lost in the depths of her trance, wasn't responding. Lucas shook her frantically, his hands trembling as he tried to break the grip the mirror had on her. "Please, Mia, come on," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. But the mirror pulsed again, its surface rippling like water, and Mia's body stiffened. She let out a low, strained whisper that seemed to carry on the air. "It's too late. I'm already here." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the coldness seeping deeper into his chest, the suffocating weight of the house pushing down on him. The shadow grew closer, its form becoming more defined with each passing moment. Its eyes, if they could even be called that, glowed with an unearthly light, and its smile twisted in a grotesque expression of malice. The children were trapped. The walls felt like they were caving in on them, and every step they took only brought them closer to the looming figure. Just when they thought all hope was lost, a sudden flash of light illuminated the room. The shadow recoiled as if it had been burned, and the mirror's hum turned into a high-pitched shriek. A figure appeared in the doorway, its outline faint at first, but then solidified, a man tall and imposing with an aura of strength and authority. It was the police officer, Officer Hart, who had been searching for them all night. He held a flashlight in one hand, the beam piercing through the darkness, and in the other he gripped a strange, ancient-looking book. He quickly rushed to Mia's side, his hands pressing against her temples, whispering words in a language none of the children understood. The house seemed to recoil, the shadows shrinking back as the light from the flashlight intensified. The figure in the room screeched in fury, but its form began to waver, flickering like a dying flame. The air seemed to crackle with energy as the officer muttered incantations, and the house itself trembled in response. Mia's body shuddered violently, her eyes finally coming back into focus. She gasped for air, her chest heaving, and with a final desperate cry, she broke free from the mirror's grasp. Her hands flew to her face as she gasped. "What happened? What's going on?" Officer Hart turned to the children, his face grave. "We need to get out of here now. This house, it's been waiting for souls like yours." The ground shook again, more violently this time, and the house seemed to scream in protest as they made their way toward the exit. The shadows swirled around them, closing in, but the officer's presence kept the darkness at bay, his words powerful enough to push back the evil that had taken root in the house. The children, exhausted and terrified, stumbled after him, their legs weak and shaky from the ordeal. As they neared the door, the air felt lighter, and the oppressive feeling that had been choking them began to lift. The shadows retreated, and the coldness started to fade. But just as they reached the door, the last thing they saw was the mirror. Its surface cracked, the reflection still twisting and writhing like something trying to break free. The house let out one final mournful scream, but the door slammed shut before they could see what came next. Outside, the night air felt like a relief, cool and refreshing against their heated skin. The officer led them toward the waiting cars, the sound of the forest's night creatures echoing in the distance. As the children climbed into the car, still trembling and in shock, they looked back at the dark shape of the house standing in the distance. It seemed to loom even larger now, like a sentient entity, as if it were watching them. "It's not over," Officer Hart said, his voice low and serious. "You've only just scratched the surface. There's much more to this house than you realize." The children exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing with questions, but they said nothing. The horrors they had witnessed tonight were too fresh, too raw to put into words. And as the car sped away, they couldn't help but wonder. Had they truly escaped? Or had the house merely allowed them to leave, for now? As the children sat quietly in the car, the night stretched out before them, shrouded in mystery and fear. The horrors they had just endured in the haunted house were forever etched in their minds. They had escaped, yes, but the question lingered. Was the danger truly over? Or had they just been given a brief reprieve? The shadows they had fled from were not gone. They were merely waiting, biding their time. The car sped away, leaving behind the eerie silhouette of the house in the distance. But for the children, the sense of escape was bittersweet. They had witnessed things that no child should ever see, things that would haunt their dreams forever. But one thing was clear. They had learned a valuable lesson that night. Fear could only control you if you let it. The strength to face darkness, whether literal or metaphorical, came from within. And no matter how frightening the journey, there was always a way out, a light to guide you home. The journey through the haunted house wasn't just a test of survival. It was a lesson in bravery, resilience, and the power of not giving up, even in the most terrifying of circumstances. The lesson. Sometimes, life presents us with situations that feel impossible to overcome, dark, overwhelming, and filled with uncertainty. But just as the children found their way out of the haunted house, we too can find a way through life's challenges, no matter how frightening they seem. The strength to face our fears lies within us, waiting to be unlocked. We can find courage even in the darkest moments if we don't let fear dictate our actions. Remember, if you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting stories. Stay tuned for more adventures. Who knows what awaits next?